Hi, I'm Baron. Welcome to Bookies. Today I'd like to discuss I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb. Now, I personally have never read a Wally Lamb novel until this one, and I'm actually quite impressed by him. Uh, this novel is rather grim, in my opinion, so I think it would get us in the right frame of mind if we could just take a minute to consider the casual criminality of cats. Take a look at this. Think about it. Get the joke yet? Give it another minute. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, have you read To Kill a Mockingbird? And is it really an instructional manual for cats to get their next meal? I think not. However, we often read fiction to get at an underlying truth. So, what's the underlying truth of this? You got it? Yeah, it's this. Cats are dumb. That's all there is to it. All right, so like I said, this novel's pretty grim. It's written from the first person perspective of Dominick Birdsey. Dominick is an identical twin, and his brother's name is Thomas, who is a paranoid schizophrenic and is very, very ill. Aside from the obvious problem of Thomas's grave mental illness, this novel is really about Dominick. Uh, it's about Dominick being sick at heart and sick in his soul. So I think we have to read this novel as more of a character study and a graphic warning. So how is it a warning? Lamb fully exposes Dominick as an angry, stunted individual whose life has become one of guilt covered over by kind of a thin veneer of grievance and self-justification. So I think it would help us if we just took a minute to describe Dominick. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning, kind of in jest, that the cat picture gives us an underlying truth? And I think this novel does as well. So let's see what we can learn from Dominick. Dominick promised his mother, as his mother was on her deathbed, that he would always take care of his twin brother. And at the same time, he kind of hates her for her making him give her that promise. It kind of puts him on guard duty for his brother his whole life. And he resents that. I mean, he very much loves his brother. That's obvious in the novel, but he very much also resents the obligation and burden of always watching out for Thomas. However, don't get me wrong, and once again, Dominick very much loves Thomas. He wants to be a good brother, and he feels guilt when he fails in that. There's a point in the novel where Dominick is told that he's a good brother, and just that statement alone causes him to weep. It shows you kind of the internal struggle that Dominick is having with this tension of wanting to do good and loving his brother, and also kind of considering his brother as being the anchor that's weighed him down his whole life. And it makes him angry. And I think Lamb does an excellent job, really excellent job of getting into the mind of Dominick, because this is written from his perspective, getting in his mind and kind of fleshing out all those emotions. So at one point, Dominick says that he understands his own stepfather's physical abuse of both Dominick and Thomas when he was a child. That's a curious statement to make. But he said it in this respect. He says, I understand it because sometimes rage feels as good as sex. And it's a welcome release. And so the point of this, what I'm trying to describe to you, is that Dominick is very self-aware. He's not clueless about his faults. He's aware of his anger, and he's kind of glorying in it. And that's kind of the picture we get of Dominick. A bitter man that's disappointed in his life. And he knows that, and he's leaning into it. And so part of this novel, Dominick is talking to a therapist, and he's processing all of his emotions and his feelings and his love for his brother, because his brother does something traumatic that really causes Dominick to have to step up and support and love his brother. And at the same time, he's processing these emotions. And so he has this internal dialogue. What good is he if he couldn't protect his brother from the physical abuse of their stepfather? And he also feels guilt because he kind of figured out how to get around that abuse. And one of those ways he was able to do that is to allow the stepfather to focus on his weaker brother, his mentally ill brother. And so it's Thomas that takes most of the physical abuse. What good is it for Dominick to talk about how he was jealous of his brother because his mom preferred his brother over him? And the striking thing is that nobody in Thomas's life preferred Thomas over Dominick. Not the stepfather, not the kids at school. The relationship with his mother is the only thing that Thomas ever had, the only time he was ever preferred and unconditionally loved. And Dominick resents him for it. What good is it to talk about a tragedy that he's experienced that no parent would ever want to experience, and the divorce that results from it? What good is it to Dominick to sort through those feelings? What good is it to sort through the feeling that he was completely incapable of comforting his wife in a time of trauma because he just felt like he just had to survive for himself? And what good is it for him to sort through the emotions that the guilt he feels because he kind of beat the biochemical rap and wasn't made ill, even though his identical twin brother is gravely ill? What good is it to consider that and sort through those emotions? What good is it to talk about any of these things when after you're done talking, it's still going to be there and nothing's going to change? And maybe you could fall back on faith and a relationship with God, but to Dominick, God is a fiction. So this presents a picture of Dominick as just basically giving up on life. He's angry, he's bitter, he feels burdened. He's so internally harmed that he's incapable of helping others, including his wife, and in certain respects, his brother. He's incapable of helping his mother as she was abused by the stepfather. There's helplessness, and he's got to the point now as an adult to where he's just leaning into it and he's accepting it and saying, yeah, I'm basically not a good person. One really excellent device that Lamb uses is a grandfather's journal. So Dominick and Thomas's mother's father was a Sicilian immigrant into the country. And as Dominick is reading this journal that the man wrote about his entire life, he's understanding that his grandfather was frankly just an awful person. But the interesting thing is he can't see that he's just like him in certain respects. He can't see how, like the grandfather, he justifies his own actions. He's certainly aware of his own sins, his own faults, but he kind of has this internal ledger that, mine are okay because the sins and evil that others have heaped upon me outweighs my own faults and sins, and therefore I'm okay in the balance of life. And frankly, that's how generational trauma just passes down from child to child to child. And I think Lamb is inviting us to judge Dominick. After all, Dominick judges himself on all of the things I just described. And here, I think it's kind of good if we just take a minute to talk about the value of fiction. And for example, we'll use this as an example. You can go to a medical clinic and you can get a pamphlet that's going to describe to you all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. And you can read about that. And you could probably even get a pamphlet that's going to tell you about how you can help or how you can cope with that if you're a family member that's not afflicted. You can read about that. You can get lots of self-help information about how to have an effective marriage and stave off divorce. You could get information about why it is that some adults want to hit kids. But all you're doing is learning about those things. The truth is in the experience. And what fiction does, it gives you the experience. Either you've experienced some of these things yourself and you can relate to the character, or at least you can be put in the character's mind and have some experience of what that means. The experience is the internal. That's where the learning happens, and that's the cold, hard facts of fiction. Nonfiction will tell you about this. Fiction will give you the truth of the matter, and that's what we get in this novel. We get the truth of the matter. And honestly, I don't think I've ever read a more vivid depiction and understanding of human pain and how it manifests in anger and self-loathing as Lamb has given us here. And so what's the lesson? What's the lesson that we're supposed to take from this? And I think the lesson that the novel gives us is empathy. Dominick is his own cancer. And most nonfiction isn't going to get you to that place where you're actually understanding why that is. Why somebody can have so much anger and self-loathing, know that about themselves and just not care because it feels better to be angry. It's easier to be angry than to try to address the issues by talking them through. And while I think everybody should read this novel, frankly, it's so damn bleak. I don't think I could read it a second time. And that's because Dominick is a meticulous steward of his own pain and the injustices that people have visited upon him. And you can see that the only way he's going to get beyond that is that he just needs to forgive and he needs to understand so he can heal. But he's struggling to do that. Now, whether he actually gets there is something I'm not going to disclose to you, but here's kind of a vivid quote from the therapist. I learned something very useful today. I learned that there are 2 young men lost in the woods. Not 1, 2. To a certain extent, Thomas is not very self-aware of his condition. He's living in a grand delusion. Dominick is self-aware, but they're both lost in the woods. And so I think Lamb has created one of the most compelling characters in Dominick Birdsey. You may not like him, at least initially, but you're definitely going to hope he heals and that he can turn the corner before his self-loathing and anger just eats him up from inside. And I think that's the strength of Lamb's novel. My recommendation is to read it. I highly recommend it. If you've ever been in a similar situation as Dominick, where you feel an obligation to do the right thing, but you don't want to because it's painful and it's hurtful, but you know you're going to do it anyhow, and you're just angry the whole way, read this novel. If you've ever had to deal with somebody in your own family or somebody you love that has mental illness and you're just struggling with how to help yourself during that time of trauma, read the novel. Lastly, if you just want to read a novel where the main character is just drafted so incredibly well, read this novel. And so I'm going to give it 4.25 stars out of 5. I'm really looking forward to reading my next Wally Lamb novel, and I'm really hoping that it's not going to be as depressing and soul-crushing as this one was. I should note that there's an HBO miniseries that goes through this whole novel, and it's quite excellent. So if you feel like, hey, I don't want to tackle a 600 plus page book because it is long, watch the miniseries. I think you will get pretty much 95% of the flavor of the novel. And with that, I want to thank you for watching this video. I do appreciate it. If you think you might like more of this content, please like the video and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you on the next novel. Have a great day and God bless.